What actually is democracy? That's a good question. You see, no one is actually really ready to define democracy. All they will tell us is, democracy is good, democracy is right. What is democracy? Well, there's lots of different versions of democracy. They don't really want to define it, because they know that every definition they give does not actually realistically describe the system of government that they call democracy that they are practicing. Abraham Lincoln described democracy as the government of the people, for the people, by the people. This is one famous definition of democracy. In fact, the actual word democracy itself means in the original Greek, rule of the people. That's what it means. If we take the concept of democracy in its absolutely pure sense, its literal meaning, the rule of the people, for the people, by the people, and that's all we're doing right now. We don't pretend to get any more sophisticated. Let's just take that meaning and examine that meaning, because at least that's one we can start with. Then is this something compatible with Islam? Is it? I just told you what Islam is in its essence. Islam is submission to Allah. Islam means obeying Allah's Sharia. Islam means obeying Allah's law. Islam means that what is halal has been decided by Allah, and what is haram has been decided by Allah, and what Allah decides is halal, was halal in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, is halal today, and will be halal until the Day of Judgment. And what Allah made haram in the time of the Prophet ﷺ is haram today, and it's going to be haram until the Day of Judgment. We rule ourselves in our personal lives, and we should, as Muslims, be ruled in our public lives by the law of Allah. Therefore, one of the names of Allah is Ash-Shari, the lawmaker, and He is Al-Hakim, the wise, and Al-Hakim, the judge, so that when we judge, we should judge according to what Allah has revealed. And as Allah mentions in the Quran, those who do not judge by what Allah has revealed, they are the disbelievers. And those people who do not judge by what Allah has revealed, they are the wrongdoers. And those who do not judge by what Allah has revealed, they are the evildoers and the oppressors. So therefore, how can the law and the sovereignty being with Allah be compatible with the law and the sovereignty being with the people? Since at its very fundamental level, democracy teaches that the people have the right to decide what is halal and what is haram. The people have the right to decide what we should do and what we shouldn't do. Therefore, the people have been made equal with Allah. And whoever makes people equal with Allah has made shirk with Allah without a doubt. And whoever believes that human beings have the right to legislate in contradiction to what Allah has legislated is without doubt a disbeliever. Is without doubt a disbeliever. Whoever believes that the legislation of the human being is equal with Allah's legislation is without doubt a disbeliever. Whoever believes that the legislation of the people is superior to Allah's legislation is without doubt a disbeliever. Whoever believes that it is permissible and allowed to judge and to legislate in contradiction with Allah's judgment and legislation is without doubt a disbeliever. However, if some Muslim, out of weakness, out of a deficiency in their iman, or due to their particular situation in a particular environment, is forced to do something, or from their desires and their weakness does something or implements something in their life which contradicts Allah's Sharia, this of course does not make you a disbeliever. This is a sin, because you accept in your heart that what Allah has legislated is the best, and that we must follow Allah's legislation. So let us take a simple example. If a person drinks alcohol, does that make them a disbeliever? No. If a person drinks alcohol, it does not make them a disbeliever. And all the Muslims, from the companions and all the scholars afterwards, except the extreme sect of the Khawarij, which many scholars said they are not Muslim anyway, they all agreed that no sin, the committing of a sin, does not take you out of Islam. There is no sin that makes you a kafir. No sin makes you a disbeliever. So if you drink alcohol, you do not become a disbeliever. You do not leave the fold of Islam. Yes, your iman may hover above your head during that time you are drinking alcohol, but you do not actually stop becoming a disbeliever. In fact, and the same with fornication or adultery. And there were people who committed adultery in the time of the Prophet. As you know, the woman and the man who committed adultery in the time of the Prophet, and they came and they said, "O Messenger of Allah, implement Allah's punishment on me." And when they started reviling this woman, the Prophet said, "Leave her, because her tawbah is so great that its tawbah, the amount of this tawbah would encompass all of the people of Medina." So she did not become a disbeliever because of this act. But if someone was to say, there is nothing wrong with drinking wine, it's halal, now that would make someone a disbeliever. Because now they have claimed that whatever Allah has made haram, they had claimed now that what Allah made haram, they made it halal. Okay? So back to the issue of democracy. There is no doubt that we Muslims must implement Allah's Sharia in our personal lives. Because the Sharia is not only some punishments that we find in the Quran, like chopping off the hand of the thief. This is one of the hudud, and there are only 4 or 5 of such hududs. The Sharia is everything. Praying, fasting, your personal life. This is all the Sharia. So we must implement this in our life. But if we were to fail due to weakness in our iman, or due to being forced due to circumstance, not accepting it in our hearts, then this does not make us disbelievers. This is very important to understand that. So therefore, now let's go back and let us ask, if democracy means that sovereignty is with the people, that the people have the right to decide what's halal and haram, and it's up to them, then no Muslim with any mustard seed's worth of iman can agree with this. If you say the sovereignty are with the people, and the people can legislate and the people can decide, I mean here on the very basic philosophical level. I know that countries have constitutions. I know that different ideas of democracy encompass different limitations for minorities and so on and so forth. But that's not what I'm discussing. I am discussing the very basic concepts, and that's it. At the very basic concepts, we all have to agree as Muslims that making a crime which is a crime in Islam, to say it is actually a crime to have a problem with this crime. Do you understand what I'm saying? It's a criminal offence in England to revile someone because of their homosexuality. So now it has been made a crime to hate the crime. Can we accept this as Muslims? Can we say that Islam is compatible with this? Does any person in this room think that this type of ideology is compatible with what Allah has revealed? I hope not. If he's Muslim, and even if he's not Muslim, logic would say, no, I can see how your religion and this ideology are not compatible. So on the very basic philosophical level, we have to say, Islam is not compatible with democracy. If we mean by democracy that people have the right to legislate and people have sovereignty. But of course, democracy doesn't necessarily mean that. People have many different ideas of democracy. People have many different concepts of what democracy constitutes. But it is not my task tonight in order to discuss all of those different possibilities and all of those different aspects and how we could possibly reconcile Islam with democracy. I don't think we need to do that. Because I believe Islam has already fundamentally laid for us a good system, a good method of governance. And that good system and that good method of governance was shown to us, first of all, by Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. In fact, if we go back and we look to the life of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam, what do we find? We find that in many aspects, the way that the Prophet ﷺ dealt with people was more fair and more just and more equitable than any democratic society that exists in the world today. We have a system called shura, which is consultation. And the Prophet ﷺ always used to consult his companions about any matter that was concerning their public affair. Or he would consult certain members of his companions who were more experts in certain areas. So not everybody would be consulted about every single thing, because not everybody is knowledgeable about every single thing. And in fact, this is common sense. I don't know about here in India, but in England, the government does not consult every single individual when it wants to look into some detailed scientific matter that is only understood by a few individuals. What do? They gather those individuals together and they question them about this matter, and then they say, we have consulted the experts and the experts tell us this, and now that becomes our policy. That makes sense. So we had this type of consultative, interactive process that was given to us by the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and that operated on all different levels of society. This is the way which the Muslims should conduct themselves, with justice, with understanding, with compassion. We should love for our brother what we love for ourselves. All of this means that we need to consult and discuss and share our knowledge amongst each other. But I don't like to call this democracy. I like to call it Islam. Why do we need to say Islam is democratic? For what reason? Because that's the time we're in. We feel we need to adjust our religion to fit this predominant culture and this predominant philosophy that seems to be dominating the world at the moment. But I don't think we need to do that. In fact, I really don't like it at all. I don't like it at all. And I often give an example like this. It might shock you what I'm going to say, but I hope you will think about what I'm going to say. Imagine we live in a society where prostitution is the normal mode by which a man and a woman physically interact with each other. Imagine prostitution is so common that it's the absolute norm. And imagine these prostitutes, when you look at them, they all seem so happy and they seem to be enjoying such a prosperous life. In fact, it seems that this society generally is very prosperous. They're building amazing machines and they have great technology. And so you imagine that because they've got these machines and they've got this technology, prostitution must be a good system as well. You think it all comes together in one big package. So some unfortunate Muslim comes along and says, you know what? We've got prostitution in Islam as well. Yes, we do. It's called nikah. You see, just as you go to the prostitute and you give her money, we go to our wife and we give her mahar. You see, it's like prostitution. And you go, astaghfirullah. How can you compare what Allah revealed and this beautiful way of life with that? Therefore, I find it very sad when Muslims start talking about Islam has democracy. Because to me it sounds like saying Islam has kufr. It's like saying nikah is like prostitution. It's not. And democracy is not like Islam on its philosophical basis. And the only reason that we feel we have to say this is because of the dominance of Western culture intellectually, philosophically and politically. And it's another very stark warning for us. Why do we always feel that we have to accommodate and bend over backwards? And this is something we hear said a lot. Something we hear said a lot. Muslims have to move into the 21st century. Islam has to move and go with the flow. We have to adapt ourselves and change ourselves. As I read in an article recently, if Islam, as we claim, is a way of life for all places and all times, then Islam has to adjust itself for all places and all times. This is another straw man. This is another, remember straw man? I talked about the straw man the other day. You build up an argument only to knock it down yourself. But it's not what we claim. We claim that Allah expects us to worship Him and follow His religion to the best of our ability in every place and every time. That does not mean that Islam changes in order to make itself fit. That is not what it means. If modern society conflicts with our religion, you know what I say? Stuff modern society. Stuff it. I need to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. How long am I going to be here on this earth? A small amount of time. I don't say, and I'm not saying here, that there is a contradiction. There are many things in modern society that are perfectly compatible with Islam. And there are many things in modern society, actually, they came from Islam originally. And in fact, this is the amazing thing. When we actually study many of the qualities that we find existing in the Western world, when we look at the history, we find that these things already existed in the Islamic civilization. And in fact, the West, or the West took those ideas from us, they implemented them, and we stopped implementing them. We can take many examples. If you read the writings, for example, of Western observers of Islam, who were writing 150 years ago, they were praising how Islam did away with racism. How Islam was a religion that accommodated all races and all peoples. Now we find who is the one leading and stepping forward in eliminating racism. It is America, it is Britain, it is these countries. In their own countries, they are making big efforts to eliminate racism. It's not something they invented. We had that in our religion for for so many hundreds of years. But unfortunately, that is one thing that the Muslims, that we had, and we've lost it. There are many things that we had if we look in our religion. The idea that it doesn't matter what background you are from. You could be the son of a dustbin cleaner, a farm worker, and you could be a scholar, you could be a doctor, you could be an engineer, you could do any career. If we look in history and we search, where does this concept come from? If we look in the West, we find that the West had something very similar to the caste system. They had the feudal system. The feudal system meant that if you were born a peasant, the peasants were called serfs. If you were born a peasant, born a serf, you were a virtual slave to your lord, who was the landowner. You were a virtual slave, and you stayed a serf. You stayed a serf. You were born a serf, and you stayed a serf. You were born a merchant, you stayed a merchant. You were born a knight, knighthood stayed in your family. You were born a baron, that stayed in your family. So all of these things were set in concrete. A serf could not become a knight. It couldn't happen. Nor did a knight become a tradesman. Which civilization in the world do we find did not recognize such distinctions? Allowed freedom of movement between people and professions? Islam. This came from Islam. Which civilization, if we look, had a system of justice where it didn't matter what part of society you were from? You could be the leader. You could be a nobleman. You could be from whatever section of society. But the qari or the judge could bring you in front of him and make a judgment from you, and it didn't matter. This was Islam. We have so many famous stories and so many famous incidents from the life of the companions. It didn't matter who you were or from what part of society you were. You were all under the same law. This is an idea that they have in the West. And I remember a friend of mine recently, he gave me, quite a long time ago, he phoned me up, and Dick Cheney, who is one of the most important people in America, very close to the president, maybe he's even the vice president, I'm not quite sure. You may know that he was recently taken to court for corruption. So my friend phoned me up, he said, have you heard the news? You see these Americans? That Dick Cheney, he's now in court for corruption. And this brother, he's a friend of mine, he's from Dubai. I said, yes. Isn't that amazing? I wonder, my brother, do you have anything like that in Dubai, where one of your princes or one of your leaders committed an act of corruption and he would stand in front of the court like that? Then he got embarrassed. Then he got embarrassed and he didn't say anything. You see, brothers and sisters, if you really want to know why, if you really want to know why and you want to see why, Allah has given these people power in the land, and the power has gone from us, is because these are the principles they live by. They may have many bad qualities, but still by and large, although I think it is changing, but still by and large they have this concept of justice. And justice for all. But look at us. Look at the Muslims. Look at our lands. Look at the way we treat each other. We can't even talk about each other. We can't even criticize each other in a just way. We find this one from this group is criticizing that one from that group. Even though there is a man in his own group or his own sect who is doing something worse, but he doesn't criticize him. Just because he's in another group, he'll criticize him. Oh, you see him? He's doing this and doing that. But the one in his own group, he turns a blind eye. Is this justice? Is this justice? Or even he will lie against this person, or slander this person, or invent stories about this person. Is this justice? We can't even deal with justice amongst each other. And these are the so-called Islamic groups. How about the ordinary people? And we wonder why we are in such a state. If these are the things that we mean by democracy, that's not democracy. That's Islam. And that's what our religion taught us 1,400 years ago. These things are our inheritance, which we have to claim. And if we look at the kuffar and we can benefit and we can see what they are doing and the way they are doing it, and we feel that this is something that we can benefit from, then alhamdulillah, there is no problem with that. But we don't, and we should never feel that we have to compromise our religion. We should never feel that we have to give up our deen. We should never feel that we have to change our whole religion in order to accommodate some ideology that, to tell you the truth, brothers and sisters, to tell you the real truth, democracy is falling apart. In many, many countries you will find that democracy is failing. In fact, they are subtly, bit by bit, giving up on democracy. In fact, my personal belief is that there is no such thing as democracy anyway. It doesn't even exist. It doesn't even exist. What they have in the West, actually, in my opinion, is the illusion of democracy. It's the illusion of democracy. They make people think and believe that they have a choice, that they can influence things, but in reality, they can't change anything. The people who control the world are the same people who have always controlled the world. They are the big businesses, they are the multinational corporations, they are those few elite people who have the power and the money in their control, and the world runs according to the principles they want. They don't care whether you have girlfriends or boyfriends, whether you're a homosexual, whether you drink alcohol or take drugs. In fact, you know what? They're like that. Because the more you follow that corruption, the more miserable your life will become. And the more miserable your life becomes, the more you need to fill your life with fashion, with film, with drink, with music, and with all the consumer things that they want you to say, look, buy this, buy that, have this, have that. That's the way to be happy. Miserable people consume. So actually it's for their benefit to create a society like that. So they imagine. So I'm not really sure anyway that the so-called democracies even have democracy. And one of the things that highlights that for me is that in England recently, not only in England, but in Italy and all over Europe, they had massive demonstrations against the war in Iraq. In England we had 2.5 million people gather together to protest this war. In Italy, it was 5 or 6 million. This is the biggest demonstrations there have ever been in history in Europe that we know about. They found through polls that the majority, and in some cases the large majority of the population opposed this action. But they still went ahead and fought the war. What happened to the rule of the people, for the people, by the people? What happened to the people deciding what we should do and what we shouldn't do? And so we find in many countries that is the case. We find in many countries that is the case. I don't know much about Indian politics, but I suspect that a very small minority actually decides what happens in this country. In America, George Bush was not even democratically elected. He was appointed by the Supreme Court. In fact, he was in the process of losing the election. He was in the process of losing it. And they stopped the count, as it's very famous, what happened in Florida. And in fact, they manipulated the vote so that George Bush should win. What sort of democracy is this? So this is what we really find. That as the famous saying goes, democracy is hypocrisy. And the reality is, when we look at many of these so-called democratic countries, what do we find? Exactly that, hypocrisy. And I look forward to the day when Muslims will stop apologizing, stop being so apologetic, realize that they have the most beautiful deen, that doesn't need any changing, it doesn't need adjusting. All we need to do is recapture the true spirit of Islam as it was practiced by the Prophet ﷺ. And then once again, brothers and sisters, once again, we will be a shining light and a guide for humanity to follow. But this is going to happen. This is only going to happen when you change your life. When you and me, brothers and sisters, when we implement Allah's law in our life, when we implement Allah's Sharia in our life, when we obey Allah, when we display the characteristics of gentleness and kindness and love and compassion and justice, yet at the same time firmness upon obedience to Allah, we will see that when we have established the Islamic State in our hearts, Allah will establish the Islamic State on the earth. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam.